So did you guys do anything fun for New Year's?
I hosted a little party with some friends.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Marianne?
I was up in New York and saw some friends from college. We went out to dinner and then went back and played board games at my friend's apartment.
You weren't wearing a diaper in Times Square, were you?
No, I was not. I decided to opt
Thank
out of
goodness.
that. Though a woman at the party I was at did, in fact, go to the ball drop a couple years ago. And she did not wear a diaper, but she did have to go to the bathroom pretty late into the night. And she said that when she left where she was standing to go to some nearby bar, she came back and apparently saw the Jonas Brothers, and they offered to give her a ride home to New Jersey, which is a pretty amazing story. And I think she did, in fact, take them up on the ride.
Teenage Marianna is dying right now. That's like
Yeah,
a
I mean,
dream
I'm still
come
dying.
true.
It's fine. Like 33-year-old Marianne is very excited about that idea.
Happy New Year and welcome to the Campaign Moment. It's Friday, January 3rd. I'm Aaron Blake, senior political reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. Today, I'm joined by Marianne LeVine, a national political reporter here at The Post. Hey, Marianne.
Hey, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
And we're also joined today by Marianna Sotomayor, a congressional reporter covering the House of Representatives for The Post.
Hi.
We know that many of you are just getting caught up on your politics news after the holidays. So here's a quick rundown of the big stories that we'll be touching on today. Early on New Year's Day, at least 14 people died after a pickup truck plowed through crowds on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. The driver was then killed in a shootout with police. The FBI says that the attacker, a man from Texas, was inspired by ISIS. Today, we're going to talk about how that attack, which is being investigated as terrorism, is reverberating through our national politics with a factually challenged nudge from President-elect Donald Trump and some allies. We're also going to talk about a big story in Congress, the next Speaker of the House. Republicans have a very slim majority in that chamber, but some House members' displeasure with current Speaker Mike Johnson of Louisiana presented a big early test of whether the party can govern and come together around Trump's agenda. Voting for House Speaker starts this afternoon, so we're taping part of today's episode with Marianna and Marianne, and later today, we'll turn to our colleague Leigh Caldwell, who will be reporting from Capitol Hill. Marianna, I think you'll be there too, right?
Yep, I'll be in the chamber watching it all happen live.
Yeah, there should be some drama there. Okay, to start, we're talking early Friday morning, and there's still a lot that we don't know about the New Orleans attack. But what we do know is that the suspect was a U.S. citizen who was born in Texas, and he served in the military. And we're already seeing some politicians invoking the event to support their political agendas. Marianne, you've covered President-elect Donald Trump's comments over the last few days about this. Can you tell us what he said about the incident?
So in response to the incident, President Trump has essentially tried to link it to the border, which was a very common campaign theme in many of his speeches. It's been interesting to watch his social media posts. Basically, the way it played out was in the hours after the attack, President Trump put out a statement that said, this is essentially what happens when you let the criminals in. So a very quick link to the border. He then...
And this was shortly after, I believe, Fox News had falsely reported that the truck used in the attack had crossed the border 2 days prior.
Correct. And then Fox News essentially updated their report to say that the truck had crossed the border, but that it was not the suspect who drove it. And so...
Yeah, and crossed the border 2 months prior, I believe.
Exactly. And law enforcement officials later said that the suspect, the assailant, basically rented the truck from an app called Turo, showing no connection with the border. So essentially this report that Fox News put out there was false, but the effect was pretty significant. And you started seeing a lot of Republicans going on Fox News, his future administration officials like Mike Waltz, incoming border czar Tom Homan, start immediately saying, you know, we need to secure the border, when really there's absolutely no connection really that we know of that's been shown between this incident and the border.
Yeah, I've really been struck by the members of Congress and incoming administration officials who have continued to talk about the border even after that Fox News report was pulled back. Let's play that audio of Trump's incoming national security advisor, Congressman Michael Waltz of Florida, talking about what needs to be done in response to the attack in New Orleans.
Close the border. secure our sovereignty, and that is completely unacceptable. The entire world knows that we have an open border. They intend to hit us, and they are pushing people into our interior to do just that, and they know.
We also had House Speaker Mike Johnson in an interview with Fox News on Thursday. Let's take a listen to that.
The congressional Republicans, we here in the House and the Senate, have repeatedly asked the DHS under the Biden administration about the correlation, the obvious concern about terrorism and the wide open border. The idea that dangerous people were coming here in droves and setting up potentially terrorist cells around the country. We have been ringing the alarms.
Guys, I think it's important to stress that a lot of these people aren't explicitly saying that this was done by an immigrant. They're emphasizing the border, but not saying like, this was because of the border. But that often seems to be the implication. And it was clearly what Trump was initially referring to in his first post on this after the initial Fox News report. He claimed that the attack had showed that he had been right all along about criminals coming across the border. And that seems to be the tenor of his comments even since that Fox News report was walked back. Why do you guys think that he's chosen to weigh in this way?
I think with Trump, to your point, Aaron, it's been really interesting to see his subsequent posts because he's no longer referencing the attack directly in his posts. Yesterday, he said something along the lines of, with the Biden open border policy, I said many times during rallies and elsewhere that radical Islamic terrorism and other forms of violent crime will become so bad in America that it'll become hard to even imagine or believe that time has come. So even though he's not talking about New Orleans directly, it seems like a pretty clear reference to it. And I think what it shows is that Trump is going to continue to seize on this theme of the border, and he's almost still in campaign mode. And I think it also shows the long-time Trump tendency to really double down, even if the facts show that what he's saying is not related to what happened in New Orleans.
Yeah, and Trump obviously made the idea that criminals and terrorists were coming across the border a big theme of his campaign. He talked about crime extensively. I think it's important to add some context and factual information here. We have seen violent crime decline since the pandemic. We've seen more terrorism in recent years from right-wing extremists than from Islamic extremists. We've also seen immigration hardliners citing people on the terrorism watch list trying to cross the border. And there have been dozens of those in recent years. But that list is pretty broad and includes many people who aren't in fact terrorists. So it's not a terribly good indicator of who's coming in. Marianna, one thing that Donald Trump has made clear that he wants to do when he's inaugurated on January 20th is institute some kind of a mass deportation operation. We don't know exactly what form that's going to take, but do you see this as being kind of an effort to bolster those plans and kind of shoehorn this attack into what he already wants to do?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Trump uses this moment. As we've seen him, Marianne was totally right. Like, this has been such a big platform of his during the campaign, just tackling border security, blaming the Biden administration for these open borders that have allowed, hypothetically, like, I don't even know how exaggerated he and other Republicans have said, like, all of these undocumented migrants who are criminals or terrorists who are coming through the porous border. So he will definitely use that as the excuse, I'm sure, to be able to enact some policies quickly. Trump has been pretty open about the fact that if Congress can't pass policies, if Congress can't address the border security situation, that he will just do it via executive order. So Congress, I think, knows that they can only move so fast, so they'll try and come in afterwards, let's say.
That's really interesting. I wanted to shift gears a little bit, but still talk about the attack in New Orleans. The question involves Trump's cabinet nominees, and I'm wondering if this attack is going to potentially impact how Congress views some of those more controversial picks. I'm thinking specifically about former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who Trump wants to be Director of National Intelligence, and also his pick to head the FBI, Kash Patel. Neither of them have the kind of traditional experience with these agencies and areas of expertise that you would expect in these roles. Gabbard has also run into some trouble because of her views on Russia and Syria. Patel has been talking about gutting the FBI. Obviously, these are two people who would have significant roles in preventing attacks like this happening in the future. And I'm wondering, do you guys have a sense of how this could potentially shift views of nominees like these ones?
I'm sure it'll come up in lines of questioning, maybe from Republicans. Definitely, we can assume by Democrats in those confirmation hearings. Does it change Republicans' minds? It could privately. Republicans have yet to come out publicly and start criticizing those two nominees that you mentioned specifically in light of this attack. But I'm sure it is something that especially national security-minded, foreign policy-minded Republicans on the Senate side will consider moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to tell because a lot of Republicans, like Marianna said, are really keeping their cards close to the vest when it comes to these nominees because there's really very little upside to publicly criticizing any of them right now and getting in the president's way. But I think that it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out because I could kind of see it playing both ways. Like I could see there being more pressure to confirm these nominees faster because the Trump administration and its allies could argue the Biden administration has done an insufficient job. And so I could see there being more pressure on Senate Republicans to quickly confirm these officials who are dealing with security issues. But at the same time, it also might draw more scrutiny. So I think it's kind of hard to tell right now, but I could definitely see an argument for it going either way.
Yeah, it's really been interesting. There have been a handful of Republican senators who have come out and said that this creates a need to confirm Trump's national security team more quickly. But I don't know that that's necessarily the same as them saying they need to confirm these specific people that quickly. You know, we haven't seen them come out and say Tulsi Gabbard needs to come in on day one and Kash Patel needs to come in on day one. Guys, are there any other potential political repercussions here? I guess I've been a little surprised that we haven't seen more talk about other issues. Could this shift the debate around things like surveillance, where, you know, the right especially has grown a little bit more skeptical of the federal government in recent years?
You know, sometimes I wonder if because this happened around New Year's and many people haven't necessarily been paying attention to the news at that time, that has contributed a little bit to part of this, because you're totally right. I mean, a terrorist attack on our soil is not something to ever joke about or to take as something small. It is a big deal. And I think the fact that we are seeing this ahead of a new administration absolutely raises questions of, you know, are there repeat attacks? The fact that the assailant was inspired by ISIS, like, what does that tell us? Does that mean there could be a potential resurgence? There's a lot of questions, and I think we will be definitely tracking and following just how all of this develops in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that Trump, as part of his commentary on this, has attacked the FBI and the CIA for alleged failures. We've seen members of Congress call for officials in the Biden administration to come up to Congress and testify. I was also struck by Trump calling for the CIA to, quote, get involved now, even though the CIA generally isn't supposed to do domestic surveillance. And this was, of course, domestic apparent terrorism. So lots of interesting issues, and maybe this debate will evolve over time as we get a little further from the holidays. Marianna, I wanted to turn to the speaker election, which is taking place on Friday. Before we get to that election, can you just set the table for us and remind us what the speaker does and why this election is so important?
Sure. So the Speaker of the House basically runs the show. The importance of today is that whenever there is a new congressional term, we're entering the 119th Congress, the first course of action is electing a speaker. Because without a speaker, there's no one to swear in lawmakers. So as much as there will be 434 lawmakers on the House floor, it's 434 because Matt Gaetz resigned last year, they can't actually vote. Like, they can't conduct the business of the House.
They can't do anything.
Yeah, they literally cannot do anything. we know just how tough and chaotic and unpredictable the last 2 years have been because of Republicans' narrow margins. That is going to be tested today on the House floor, not just for the speakership vote, but of course to be able to even make sure that the House is able to operate.
Yeah, and people might remember that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy needed 15 rounds of voting to be installed as Speaker 2 years ago. He was ousted 9 months later by House Republicans who joined with Democrats. And we also saw Mike Johnson come in after that, and there was an effort to oust him as well. He was only saved in the end by Democrats. Can you talk a little bit about the process for electing a speaker? How does the voting actually work?
Sure. So Johnson, because House Republicans at this point in time have a 219 majority, he can only lose one Republican. That one Republican has been consistently saying he would be voting against Johnson. No one can change his mind. He is Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky. So that means that Johnson has had to work the last couple weeks to make sure that every single Republican, all 218 Republicans, vote for him. The problem is that even though Donald Trump has endorsed Johnson, which is a big deal, and did influence a number of Republicans who were wavering on Johnson to end up voting for him today, there are still a handful, about half a dozen, who just are so mad at Johnson. They don't like how he has led over the past year and some months. They don't like that at the end of the day, he has had to rely on Democrats, even though some of these members are the reason why. They have blocked conservative legislation because, it didn't have enough spending cuts to whatever bill that they were considering at the time. That has all kind of bubbled up to this moment.
Marianne, what are the reasons that these members don't like Mike Johnson? I think, we just had a recent government shutdown debate where there was some complaints about his leadership. There was the Ukraine funding bill last year. What does this boil down to?
I think it really boils down to the ideological split in the Republican Party over government spending and how much to focus on that. I think that you're seeing a group of House Republicans who really care about the deficit and want to see cuts. And it always gets much more complicated when you ask what exactly should be cut. But I think what we're seeing is there's a real ideological split in the Republican Party over this issue. And it's not something that Trump has cared about a lot. And I think he has really changed parts of the party, at least, in terms of really focusing on the deficit. Like, it's not something he talks about in his campaign speeches. It's not something that's a really big focus for him. But it is a big focus for a lot of more traditional, more Tea Party Republicans. And so I think that that's what we're really seeing here. And it's not an area where the GOP is unified. And so I think that that's why you have some of these House Republicans who want to see changes but are unlikely to actually see the changes happen just because it's quite complicated once you actually start zeroing down on what actually needs to be cut.
Yeah, like, do you cut entitlements? Do you cut military spending? All these issues are very difficult, and we do see significant divides in the party right now over this. So we'll be watching how that plays out on Friday afternoon. Marianne and Marianna, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Jinx.
We're going to take a quick break there, and when we come back, we'll hear from the Post's Leigh Caldwell about the speaker election. We'll be right back.
I'm impressed with your math skills, Mariana. I was like, okay,
Oh my
doing
gosh.
the math in
It's
my
almost
head.
like she's been thinking about this.
Yes, I'm so bad at math. So I've had to ask like 1,000 people. I'm like, am I right? Is 218 minus 1 217?
Okay, it's a little before 3 p.m. on Friday, and earlier today, the new Congress was sworn in. There was some drama, but they have now officially elected Mike Johnson as House Speaker again.
Mike Johnson of the state of Louisiana, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 119th Congress.
And I've just connected with Leigh Caldwell, who is a dogged Post reporter and author of the Early Brief newsletter, who is joining us from Capitol Hill to talk about it. Hey, Leigh.
Hey, Aaron.
So, Leigh, tell me what just happened there.
Yeah, so at the end of the first round of voting, Speaker Johnson was down 3.
3 Republican votes, yeah.
He could only lose 1 vote. And so what happened is they actually never gavelled it, and they never did the final tally. The reason is because Johnson held open the vote. He took Ralph Norman and Keith Self, 2 of the 3 holdouts, into
Ralph
a
Norman
room
from South Carolina and Keith Self from Texas.
Yeah, so he took them just to a little room, the cloakroom off the House floor, and they talked. And they came out and they switched their vote to Mike Johnson.
Is it unusual for the vote to be held open like that? I think we were all, a lot of us were assuming that the vote was over and then it just wasn't announced for a while. Like, how can they just leave the vote open and allow for this kind of negotiation to take place during a vote like this?
Yeah, that happens all the time on Capitol Hill. There's the infamous Medicare vote in early 2000s that was held open when George W. Bush was president. Nancy Pelosi did this all the time, too, when she needed the votes. This is a very common tactic where leaders try to kind of strong arm or cajole or convince or make a deal to get people on their side to pass something. And in this case, to elect Mike Johnson Speaker of the House.
Leigh, there were a number of other Republican members who had balked at supporting Johnson, or at least announcing their intentions to support him ahead of this vote. And a number of them during the vote just didn't respond when their name was called. I think there was about a half dozen of them. When the vote came back around, they ultimately did vote for Johnson. How do you read that development here? That was a very unusual situation, at least for a speaker vote. This was a significant number of members who didn't respond at all when they were initially called on.
Yeah, well, it was a significant number of members. Like you said, it happens a lot. People leave the floor, come back. But this was a significant number of members who had concerns and had voiced skepticism about Mike Johnson. And so they're still on the floor right now, so I haven't had a chance to talk to them to ask them why this was their tactic, which I'm hoping to do soon. But it was either to wait and see if Johnson would have the votes so that they didn't have to be a deciding vote, or maybe they wanted to put Mike Johnson on notice of these are the people who are going to be watching very closely.
That's a really good point. So maybe there is some symbolism in that, and at least a signal that Johnson needs to watch himself moving forward. I wondered, beyond that, what does this say about where the Republican Party is right now, that Johnson was able to at least, with some uncertainty and with some cajoling, at least get past this first test as Republicans start to take control of Washington?
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult for Johnson. He has been telling members that there has been a paradigm shift, and that has been his argument when he has been talking to these Johnson skeptics, saying that he had a divided government where he had to fund the government and try to pass legislation with a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate. Now that paradigm shift is that there is a Republican Senate, Republican House, and of course a Republican president once Trump is inaugurated on January 20th, and that it will be much easier to pass the Republican agenda and Republican priorities and reduce government spending. So that has been his argument, but still, it's going to be quite difficult. He has one of the slimmest House majorities in history, and so that majority is so slim that getting a raucous, often divided Republican Party on the same page is going to be extremely difficult, especially when they're tackling major pieces of legislation like tax cuts, border security, energy production are their priorities. And these are expensive things. And he's also going to have to cut spending alongside of that. So as one source told me yesterday, they said, and I'm paraphrasing here, well, good for Johnson for wanting this job because it is a miserable job to have.
And I think it's going to be testing him certainly a lot in the next few months and certainly the next couple of years. Leanne, thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Leanne Caldwell is a co-author of the Early Brief newsletter and a Washington Post live anchor. Earlier in today's episode, we heard from Marianna Sotomayor, congressional reporter covering the House of Representatives for the Post, and national political reporter Marianne LeVine. If you're tuning in via Post Reports, we'll keep bringing you these conversations once a week through Inauguration Day, usually on Fridays. But you can also listen via the Campaign Moment show feed itself. Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and mixed by Sam Bair. It was edited by Reena Flores and Rachel Van Dongen. Our team also includes Maggie Penman, Monica Campbell, Ted Muldoon, Alana Gordon, Ariel Plotnick, Bishop Sand, Rennie Svernovsky, Sabby Robinson, Emma Talkoff, Sean Carter, Peter Bresnan, Allison Michaels, Renita Jablonski, Martine Powers, and Elahe Izadi. I'm Aaron Blake. See you next time.